Hello, we are the SIP 2011 interns for the Art Marshall Foundation. This summer we were charged in finding or calculating the cost of the drought here in South Florida. We're trying to look at the benefit of restoring wetlands and the Everglades as opposed to the cost of managing droughts as they occur.
The hydrological cycle is a simple but uncannily accurate depiction of Florida's response to drought. Sadly, the cycle illustrates not only the reactions of the general public, but also of those better informed and directly involved with water management. As the cycle illustrates, once the realities of drought set in, people become aware. Drought shows its face through brown grass and speaks through newspaper headlines. Citizens find themselves concerned with the implementation of reactive water restrictions. The skies remain dry and concern escalates into panic. However, as quick as a few good Florida rainstorms, concern and panic evaporate into apathy. Within these first few rains, drought ceases to make headlines and is pushed back to page 10D. This state of apathy between droughts needs to change as into a proactive drought prevention stage before the water supply runs dry.
I'll do that.
For our project, we wanted to define what a drought could be. So we define it as a persistent deficiency in water that has adverse impacts on vegetation, animals, and people, which can negatively impact the economy, agriculture, and the ecosystem. We try to focus our project more on socioeconomic effects. So to understand the drought, we must also understand how the water cycle functions. The water cycle shows the flow of water from land and ocean back into the atmosphere. Precipitation in the form of rain here in Florida falls from clouds onto the earth, and it usually averages 52 inches here in South Florida. This water accumulates on the land surface and it flows into ponds, lakes, canals, marshes, and wetlands, and also into the ocean and the Gulf. It then seeps into the ground and recharges the aquifers. The water in these areas serves to refill rivers, lakes, or be extracted for human consumption and use. After the sun's radiation warms up the surface of the earth, the water is evaporated from water surfaces or released from plants through transpiration. The combination of these effects is called evapotranspiration, or ET. After evapotranspiration occurs, water is once again moved into the atmosphere where it condenses and precipitates, thus continuing the cycle. It is important to know that the bigger DET usually means that the higher rainfall probabilities, and here in South Florida we have some of the higher rates of ET, thus we should have the higher rates of rain and water storage.
It is important to note that droughts are normal. Cycles of wet and dry periods have occurred as far back as man can remember, and likely before that. Droughts and floods are also human concepts. In the absence of humans, a natural system copes with both extremes just fine. Problems arise for us when we build our homes in historic lowlands, and natural cyclic patterns of high water ruin our property. Conversely, problems arise in times of drought. In Florida, droughts can be drastically exacerbated by increased demand of water and uneven distribution of this precious resource. Everglades drainage. Damming, ditching, and diverting water flow in the Everglades ecosystem has drastically altered and diminished the glades. At one point, the Everglades made up nearly 11,000 square miles of South Florida landscape. Today, only half the entire system remains. Much has been changed over the past 120 or so years in response to our exploding population. First, there is the tremendous opportunity to drain the Everglades in order to make the land profitable for agriculture and development. Then, there was the need for Florida for the flood control to protect people that now live in and around the River of Grass. This came in the form of the Central and South Florida Project, circa 1948.
Between 1998 and 2011, there have been 4 droughts costing millions, perhaps billions, in drought management. In addition, through the draining of wetlands, the Everglades is now half of its original size, leaving less space for water retention and storage. We have plenty of water in South Florida, with an average rainfall of 54 inches per year. However, through mismanagement and lack of storage, most of this water goes to tide. An average of 65 billion gallons of water per day goes to tide every year. This Therefore, it is important for SERP implementation to restore our wetland areas for better water retention.
One of the largest factors in public water supply management is population growth. The rapid population growth Florida experienced between 1990 and 2005 led to an approximately 30% increase in water withdrawals for public water supply. As populations continue to grow, public water supply will place more and more stress on Florida's water system.
To understand the drought, we must understand its impacts. There are various ways of categorizing impacts through indirect or direct. For instance, direct could be seen when there's a loss of crops due to the loss of water. Also, an indirect could be seen, for instance, in the increase of the price of oranges. There are other categories that you can use to categorize drought impacts through social, environmental, and economic categories. Social has to do with stress, health, nutrition, recreation, public safety, and for instance, looking at a landscape that has been affected by drought, that's through aesthetic and cultural values.
Environmental losses are caused by damages to plant and animal species. Wildlife habitat and air and water quality are often damaged in times of drought. Increases in forest and range fires are also seen. Many of the effects of drought are short-term, ending as the drought comes to an end. However, many environmental effects of drought hinder the area for longer periods of time. For example, wildlife habitat may be ruined through loss of wetlands, lakes, and vegetation. Some species of animals may be wiped out from the area as well. Economic impacts are the focus of our presentation. Economic impacts of drought are centered around direct losses of revenue due to the drought. Industries where this commonly occurs are agriculture and tourism.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the increased cost of wildfires during drought years. It is important to note that many of Florida's ecosystems are fire-driven and need fire in order to be healthy. It is also important to note that if these ecosystems are not properly managed through prescribed burns, they may become overgrown and have increased what is called fuel or dead leaf litter for the fire to burn on. This can cause the fire to burn out of control and become unmanageable. Couple this with a drought year, and you could have a situation where the fire is burning up into the canopy and killing the tree. This is what the picture is illustrating on this slide. This is not a natural situation. In 2007, Florida experienced the worst wildfire in its history, called the Boogaloo Fire. It burned in parts of Georgia and Florida and ranged out of control for 2 months. In Florida alone, it burned over 100,000 acres and cost Florida over $12 million. This fire was not in South Florida, but used as an example can show how bad wildfires can get if not properly managed and during a drought year. Currently in 2007, there have been over 4,000 wildfires which have burned over 200,000 acres. We have calculated the cost of suppression to be over $14 million for 2011, and over the course of SERP, that would amount to over $171 million if these drought trends continue.
Another area that was negatively affected was agriculture. In 2007, which was one of the driest seasons in 80 years, there was a cost of $100 million a month in revenue loss. This year we calculated that loss to be around $630 million for the dry season. Orange prices have also been increasing. They've been tripling in 2011, and we calculated it to be $100,000 in revenue loss. We also talked to some sugarcane agricultural farmers, and they said that between 2007, the revenue loss was between 100 to 150, and this year is between 100 to 200 million dollars, meaning that we're getting close to those figures for the dry years.
Horticulture includes landscape plants and nurseries, which can be greatly affected during a drought year because newly established trees and shrubs need a great deal of water in order to become established. A study conducted in 2009 by the University of Florida found that in 2000, nursery and landscape firms lost $245 million due to drought conditions in Florida. Using these numbers and putting them into terms of the 16 counties in the South Florida Water Management District, in 2011, nurseries and landscape firms could have lost over $58 million in revenue.
Florida is the top tourism destination in the world. Tourism in Florida has an annual economic impact of $57 billion. Although drought itself does not deter tourists from Florida, its long-reaching effects do. Wildfires, whose occurrence and severity is heightened in drought years, cause serious losses in the tourism industry. The Florida wildfires of June and July 1998 cost at least $600 million. This price estimate includes the cost of canceling the Daytona 500 and a steep decline in tourism. Negative nationwide media coverage of the 1998 fires required Florida to spend $300,000 of emergency funds on media campaigns throughout the country reassuring travelers that Florida was safe. A forestry study found that in situations of presence of high fire danger conditions, reported health problems from smoke and ash, and the spread of fire to nearby vacation regions, 45 to 55% of tourists would make substantial alterations, either changing or canceling their trip plans. This is an example of wildfires spun out of control due to drought conditions affect the tourism industry. Tourism in South Florida during the is often dependent on water. Drought can affect water access or navigation problems for recreation and can, among many other water influences. Tourists in Florida enjoy many activities dependent on water, such as airboat rides. A quick trip to TripAdvisor.com and potential tourists are quickly deterred from visiting. The first few headlines reading, "Drought threatens Everglades tours, drought limits access, disappointing boat trip due to drought conditions." These sad stories are the reality of the effects of drought on tourism. Often these effects on tourism are overlooked. However, when tourists catch wind of them, they do not visit our beautiful Florida. That was wrong.
Municipalities can also be greatly damaged in a drought year in the form of increased pumping and operational fees. West Palm Beach has been buying water from the county since June 7, 2011 at a cost of $6,000 per day, which we calculated to be $216,000. And pipes and pumping operational fees, West Palm Beach has spent an additional $300,000, and Lake Worth has spent an additional $145,000 in 2011. This can be as much as a 50% increase from a non-drought year. Water citation and water restriction costs can also go up in a drought year. The counties in South Florida Water Management District has spent over $74,000 in water enforcement for 2011.
Freshwater flows are important to the Caloosahatchee estuary. Most problems with water quality are associated with too much nutrient-rich freshwater being flushed down the C-43, also known as the Caloosahatchee. However, during times of drought, lack of freshwater flow into this river can cause problems in the freshwater and estuarine portions of the system. In freshwater areas east of Franklin Lock, harmful algal blooms have caused health advisories for Lee, Henry, Glades County. The increased biological oxygen demand from these phytoplankton have also led to hypoxic conditions, further stressing the aquatic community. In estuarine areas west of Franklin Lock, salinities remain well above the preferred range for the eastern oyster, a key indicator species for the success of CERP, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, and an important habitat for many aquatic organisms. A low salinity zone habitat is a critical component to the spawning success of shellfish and finfish alike, according to the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Commission. It is very difficult to find a direct relationship between drought and the decline of fisheries. In fact, some fisheries can even improve in times of drought. This past year, a bass tournament in Lake Okeechobee was one of the most successful ones yet, according to FWC officer. The Mather Report was commissioned by the Everglades Foundation to place an economic valuation on the Everglades restoration. One of their categories including the fishing industry, both recreational and commercial. Though these numbers do not represent an economic impact on fisheries in relation to drought, it is important to realize that these benefits can only be enjoyed if we are better able to manage our water resources through a restored river of grass. In Lake Okeechobee, the endangered snail kite suffers in times of drought when their prey, the apple snail, cannot survive in the prolonged periods of dry down.
This slide is leading into our conclusion. It shows you that right now we are still in a serious drought situation. Even though it has been raining the past few weeks, we still need to take our drought situation in South Florida seriously and realize that we are not out of the woods yet.
In face of possible drought increases, drought management proposals are more pertinent than ever. Drought poses a particularly difficult management problem as it often has no clear-cut beginning or end. Drought policy should outline clear sets of principles upon which to base management of drought and its impact. These policies need to take into account the specific region, population groups, environmental concerns, economic sectors, and stakeholder groups. This requires serious dedication and a so far unseen level of cooperation in the South Florida area, as stakeholder groups here have vastly different prerogatives. Drought policy should be directed towards reducing the risks of drought through developing awareness and understanding of the drought hazard. Region-specific warning flag guidelines must be developed in order to most accurately identify incoming drought. Region-specific monitoring must also be developed. These will allow decision-makers adequate knowledge and time to develop drought-specific reactive plans. Although these reactive policies and planning are a critical aspect of managing a current drought, in the long run, reoccurring drought must be dealt with in a long-term, proactive, mitigative approach. This can be done through solutions such as restoring key Everglades restoration and water storage supply.
There are both long and short-term solutions when it comes to dealing with the adverse effects of drought. First and foremost is Everglades restoration, to ensure the enhancement and protection of South Florida's water supplies and natural areas. Drip irrigation is another easy way for people to use much less water when taking care of their plants. Here, the precious resource is diverted directly to where it needs to go, on the plants. Water conservation before droughts is an effective way to manage for the wide-ranging cost of drought before they occur, as opposed to reactive measures currently in place. Xeriscaping is important because we must show homeowners that there are other ways to landscape their yard other than using the water-hungry turf grasses, ever so popular today in the developed areas. Increasing the cost of water will force people to think more consciously when they use water, if they want to save money. And finally, it's important to educate people about where their water comes from, hopefully to get them to think more sustainably and how to use their water resources. For this to occur, we must have a paradigm shift in the way people think about their water resources. Many wetlands act as important stormwater treatment areas and slowly release water into the aquifers that can be used later for drinking. Wakotahachie is a good example of a mini wetland that does just that, while providing excellent habitat for birds. Long-term solutions, such as wetland restoration and water storage, further help us cope with future droughts by capturing much of the water that is currently wasted to tide. And finally, reestablishment of peat, which is a decomposed organic material, allows for water retention as well as nutrient uptake, while at the same time fighting against the threat of sea level rise. Thank you. Authorized by Congress in 2000, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, also known as SERP, is the largest environmental restoration effort in history. Goals include enhancement of Everglades wetlands and associated lakes, rivers, and bays in the 16-county region of South Florida, as well as the capture and storage of the water currently lost to the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico. SERP is a $13.5 billion mission spanning more than 30 years and involving many levels of government and stakeholders. Supporting SERP and other restoration efforts is crucial we hope to better cope with droughts in the future and avoid the wide-ranging adverse impacts that come with them.
In taking into account all the economic costs we just went over, we calculated the total economic impact for 2011 in drought management to be over $976 million. Over the course of SERP, that would amount to over $11 billion in drought management alone. Therefore, we surmise that SERP implementation through river or grass restoration and wetland restoration is the best way to help mitigate drought impacts, and will also help with endangered species impacts and soil oxidation problems.
So remember, Florida, don't fall into a state of apathy. Droughts are a reoccurring cycle and must be managed.
And it never failed that during the dry years, the people forgot about the rich years, and during the wet years, they lost all memory of the dry years. It was always that way. John Steinbeck.